What if the person who swore to love you forever walked away the moment your world collapsed? It sounds like a nightmare, but for many men, it's reality. You lose your job, and suddenly she's distant. Your health breaks down and her affection starts to fade. Depression hits, and the woman who once promised to stay becomes a stranger in your own home. Most men dismiss these stories. They say, "That won't happen to me. My relationship is different." But deep down, there's a whisper you can't silence. What if I'm not as valuable to her tomorrow as I am today? This is the fear no man wants to admit, because it means love might not be as unconditional as we want to believe. It means loyalty might have an invisible price tag. And here's the part that makes it worse. History has already tested this on a massive scale. Not in theory, not in my opinion, but in brutal, real-life conditions that stripped away every illusion about what love really means when survival is on the line. What happened shocked even the men who lived through it. What they discovered about loyalty is disturbing, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. And once you hear it, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. So, if you've ever wondered how much love really lasts when everything else falls apart, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see the truth that most men never want to face, but every man needs to know. When you strip away comfort, you also strip away illusions. That's why the most painful truths about love never show themselves during good times. They surface only when everything collapses. In the frozen wilderness of Siberia, entire generations of men were thrown into prison camps. These weren't criminals. They were teachers, poets, farmers, soldiers, ordinary men reduced to nothing overnight. Their names were replaced with numbers, their status, their wealth, their dignity all erased in a single stroke. These camps became more than prisons. They became laboratories that tested the deepest layers of loyalty under conditions no family could possibly prepare for. At -60 degrees, survival was measured in minutes. Men lost fingers, toes, and sometimes their minds. Yet the coldest thing many of them faced wasn't the snow. It was the silence from the women who once promised they'd never leave. Letters that started daily became weekly, then monthly, then nothing. Packages of food and clothing, which often meant life or death, stopped arriving. Visits that once carried hope turned into excuses, and then into silence. But abandonment was only part of the story. What truly shattered these men was how quickly they were replaced. While husbands counted endless days inside the camps, wives and girlfriends were starting new lives outside of them. Marriages ended within months. Engagements dissolved before trials even finished. Some men received divorce papers in the same envelope as their official sentence. You're not betrayed, you're being updated. One Russian writer, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, documented these patterns again and again. He saw successful businessmen whose wives remarried within months, soldiers whose fiancées were pregnant with another man's child before their trial even ended, husbands who opened letters only to find divorce papers delivered with their death notice. Case after case, story after story. Too many to dismiss as coincidence. What emerged was chilling loyalty wasn't unconditional at all. It was transactional. Women's devotion, their affection, their support. These weren't permanent gifts. They were conditional exchanges tied directly to what the man could provide, represent, or offer. Not a conscious calculation, not an evil plot, something deeper, something automatic, a survival instinct written into the human mind. And this is what makes the truth so disturbing. It wasn't about age, class, or education. The pattern cut across every background. Ordinary women, in extraordinary circumstances, making the same decision again and again. And that decision revealed something about loyalty that no man wants to face. But every man needs to understand. Yet in the middle of this predictable pattern, something else appeared. A small group of women who refused to obey those rules, while most drifted away or started over. These women clung to their men with a devotion so rare that history still remembers their names. They weren't waiting quietly at home. They were fighting a war of loyalty every bit as brutal as the prisons themselves. Some of them walked hundreds of miles through ice and snow just to be near the camps. They stood in endless lines, carrying food and clothing that might never reach the men they loved. They learned to navigate bureaucracies designed to crush hope, begging for the smallest chance to deliver a letter or a package. They endured poverty, ridicule, and even the risk of arrest themselves, all to maintain a connection with men who might never return. The Decembrist wives became symbols of this rare devotion. Their loyalty wasn't passive, it was active warfare. They battled a system designed to sever bonds and erase marriages. They paid with their health, their safety, their social standing, and they did it willingly. But here's what most people miss. These women were not the norm. They were the exception. Their loyalty was so rare, it became legendary. If loyalty were natural, their names would have been forgotten like everyone else. But because they were outliers, their devotion was immortalized. That's proof of how uncommon true loyalty really is. So what made them different, Ev? It wasn't only about the man. Their loyalty was tied to something larger, a cause, an ideal, an identity fused with their partners. To abandon him would have been to abandon themselves. These women had a strength that went beyond ordinary psychology. They weren't clinging to romance. They were waging war against the forces trying to erase it. Their stories inspire, but they also expose a painful truth. The reason we remember them is because most women didn't act that way. For every wife who trudged through frozen wilderness, countless others turned their backs. For every woman who risked everything to stay, many more weighed the cost and decided it was too high. That's why the gulag years didn't just reveal betrayal. They revealed the engine driving loyalty itself. For the majority, love was conditional. Loyalty had limits, and those limits surfaced the moment a man could no longer provide, protect, or represent value. The few who remained weren't proof of the rule. They were proof of how rare it is to break it. If this hits hard, wait until you hear what came next. The lesson from these extremes is brutal, but clear. Abandonment wasn't driven by cruelty. Loyalty wasn't fueled by magic. Both came from something older, something buried deep inside the human brain. The gulag exposed what most men never want to admit. Loyalty is not purely a choice. It's an instinct shaped by survival. For women, this instinct was forged over thousands of years. Imagine life centuries ago. A woman tied to a man who lost his ability to provide or protect faced one outcome: ruin. Her survival, and the survival of her children, depended on attaching herself to strength. Staying with a man stripped of those abilities often meant death. That reality burned itself into the female psyche, not as conscious calculation, but as biological reflex. That's why loyalty so often collapses the moment a man's value collapses. It isn't a deliberate betrayal. It isn't cruelty. It's the survival mechanism activating below awareness. One day she's devoted, the next she's distant. To her, it feels like the only option. She may not even understand why she's pulling away. The excuses come later, the explanations, the justifications, the stories she tells herself to make the choice sound reasonable. But underneath, it's instinct. This is why the shift feels like a switch being flipped. One day she calls you her soulmate. The next, she wonders if she ever loved you at all. The history you built together gets rewritten. Years of devotion are reframed as just going through the motions. Promises of forever are dismissed as words said in the moment. And here's the unsettling part. She often believes her own rewrite. It isn't deliberate deceit. It's her mind erasing contradictions so she can move forward. For the men in the camps, this truth cut deeper than the cold. Frostbite could take fingers. Hunger could take flesh. But the realization that love was conditional shattered the belief in permanence. And once that belief was gone, every man faced a choice collapse under the weight of betrayal, or rise into something stronger. This is where survival became more than physical. It became psychological. Because the men who faced this truth without breaking discovered a kind of strength most never touch. A strength that begins with one brutal reframe. Loyalty isn't guaranteed. It's data. For many men, betrayal was the final blow. It broke their will to live more effectively than starvation or frostbite ever could. They had built their identity on being loved, on being needed, on being valued by a woman waiting at home. When that collapsed, they collapsed with it. Their bodies kept moving, but their spirit was gone. And in the camps, that meant death. But not every man broke. Some chose a different path. They took the pain of abandonment and turned it into fuel. They refused to let betrayal define them, and instead used it to rebuild themselves from the inside out. These men discovered something their former lives had never forced them to face: the power of psychological sovereignty. The process was brutal, like metal heated white-hot and hammered into a new shape. These men were remade under pressure that would crush most people. The first step was reframing betrayal. Instead of asking, "Why did she do this to me?" they asked, "What does this teach me about reality?" Betrayal stopped being a wound and became information. Pain transformed into knowledge. Personal tragedy became universal wisdom. From there, they built inner systems that could not be taken away. Daily rituals became their anchor. They woke at the same time every day, no matter the conditions. They exercised, even in the snow. They practiced mental disciplines that needed no audience, no recognition. Meaning came through action, not approval. Each habit was a brick in the fortress they were constructing within themselves. And here's the paradox they uncovered: when you stop needing loyalty, you often inspire it. But by then, it doesn't control you anymore. Real strength isn't about being loved. It's about being whole without love. It isn't about being praised. It's about being unshakable without praise. It isn't about being needed. It's about needing nothing outside yourself to survive. This transformation wasn't about bitterness or hating women. It was about reclaiming power that had been given away. It was about becoming a man whose value no longer rose or fell with anyone else's loyalty. And once that foundation was built, nothing, no betrayal, no silence, no abandonment could ever shake it again. If you're still with me, you're about to see the discipline that made these men unbreakable. Out of this transformation came something extraordinary. Survivors called it the discipline of stone. These weren't poetic words. They were lived realities. It meant unmovable principles, no betrayal, no hunger, no political system could ever break. Wake at the same hour, even when exhausted. Train the body, even when strength was gone. Pursue craft and purpose, even when no one was watching. Build, even when no applause would ever come. This discipline turned men into their own foundation in a world built to destroy foundations. The lesson was simple but terrifying if your mission depends on love. Your mission is fragile if your sense of self rests on loyalty. You're standing on sand. The men who survived weren't those clinging to relationships. They were the ones anchored to something bigger, a vision, a purpose, a cause beyond themselves. For some, it was art, even in camps. They carved words, wrote poems, and created beauty in hell. For others, it was truth and obsession with understanding reality, even in chaos. For some, it was faith, a belief that darkness could not erase. For others, it was skill, mastering a craft that gave life meaning even in chains. Whatever the mission, it had one thing in common. It came from within, not from outside. No woman could give it. No betrayal could take it. It was independent, unshakable, untouchable, and that made it indestructible. This doesn't mean rejecting women or shutting down emotionally. It doesn't mean building walls so high no one can reach you. It means establishing your mission first. It means building your peace with or without applause. It means creating your own meaning and letting others join you without ever letting them become the foundation. The mission becomes your North Star when all else collapses. When she leaves, when loyalty fails, when silence replaces love, the mission remains. It guides you through storms and anchors you in chaos. It is the one light no betrayal can dim. And history showed this with brutal clarity. Men who had it survived. Men who didn't perished. And if you think this is cold, what comes next is actually freedom. If this shakes your faith in love, good. It means you're finally seeing clearly. Because the truth about loyalty isn't meant to crush you, it's meant to free you. The men who endured the darkest years discovered that once you stop expecting unconditional devotion, you stop being destroyed by its absence. The moment you accept that loyalty has limits, you stop being blindsided when those limits appear. And once you understand the survival code that drives human behavior, you stop taking betrayal personally. This clarity changes everything. You stop living in the fantasy that enough sacrifice guarantees eternal devotion. You stop clinging to the illusion that your story is special, or that your relationship is immune to the laws of nature. Instead, you begin to appreciate loyalty while it exists, without demanding permanence. You enjoy love when it's present, without needing it to last forever. You value what women bring not as oxygen to survive, but as music that makes silence richer. The men who carried this mindset out of the camps learned something most men never do. Women's loyalty isn't worthless, it's priceless, precisely because it isn't guaranteed. You savor it while it exists, and you remain whole when it doesn't. Their suffering carved out wisdom most men only stumble into after years of heartbreak. The strongest realized that masculine strength isn't built on external validation. It's built on internal sovereignty. And sovereignty doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean bitterness. It means being able to stand tall when everything else collapses. It means generating meaning within yourself, while still staying open to connection. It means being complete alone, while still choosing companionship. When you no longer need loyalty to survive, you can finally enjoy it. When you no longer require love to define you, you can finally experience it as a gift, not a lifeline. Here's the paradox: when you stop needing loyalty, you often inspire it. But by then, it no longer has power over you, because true strength isn't clinging to permanence, it's standing strong even when permanence doesn't exist. That is freedom, and no betrayal can ever take it away. The men who survived the unthinkable came to see catastrophe as a teacher. Betrayal became a classroom. Abandonment became a curriculum. Every failure of loyalty revealed how people really function once illusions are stripped away. What most men call tragedy. These survivors came to treat as training. They learned that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest steel, that the very pain designed to break them could instead remake them. Reframing betrayal doesn't mean pretending it doesn't hurt. It means refusing to waste the hurt. When she leaves, you don't bury the pain or numb yourself. You let the wound teach you what reality actually looks like. When loyalty collapses, you don't drown in bitterness. You build systems that no longer depend on it. Every heartbreak becomes information. Every loss becomes data. Every disappointment becomes fuel. This is not false optimism. It is survival, turned into strength. The most powerful discovery was this: accepting the limits of loyalty doesn't make you weaker. It makes you free. When you stop expecting forever, you stop living in fear of the ending. When you release women from the impossible burden of being unconditional, you release yourself from the torment of needing them to be. And the paradox is clear: only by letting go do you gain the kind of strength that lasts. Freedom means loving without chains, giving without keeping score, committing without demanding equal return. Not because you're naive, but because you're strong enough to stand without it. When you no longer need love to survive, you can finally enjoy it for what it really is. Not oxygen, but music. Not a lifeline, but a gift that makes life richer while it lasts. The dark truth about loyalty is not that women are evil. It's that reality doesn't care about our fantasies. And in that darkness lies a light that never burns out the light of self-mastery, the flame of inner sovereignty. That is the one fire no betrayal can ever extinguish. The men who endured those frozen camps paid the price so we wouldn't have to. They suffered so we could learn. They lost everything so we might finally see the rules of the real game. And once you accept those rules, once you stop fighting illusions, you will never be powerless again. Because the only loyalty you can truly depend on, the only loyalty that lasts forever, is the one you build within yourself. So if this message struck something deep inside you, don't ignore it. Hit subscribe. Share this with a brother who needs to hear it. And remember this: love may fade, loyalty may fail, but sovereignty endures.